The sun hung low over the African kingdom, casting golden hues over the dense forests and winding streams. The land was rich with life, where towering trees whispered secrets in the wind, and the river flowed endlessly like an ancient song. Villages thrived under the rule of the great king, and while the royal palaces stood tall with their grandeur, the rural lands told a different tale, one of hardship and survival. In a small, weathered hut at the edge of the village, a young girl named Zuri lived under the cruel watch of her stepmother, Rina. Zuri had once known love, or at least she thought she had. Before her father passed away, he would tell her bedtime stories of princesses who overcame great struggles, of warriors who fought against fate and won. But those stories felt like a distant memory now. Ever since her father was gone, Zuri had become nothing more than a servant in her own home. From dawn until dusk, her hands never stopped working. If she wasn't sweeping the floors, she was washing the clothes. If she wasn't washing the clothes, she was fetching water from the faraway stream. Rina never let her rest, and Zuri had learned that complaining only brought her more suffering. She had no time for dreams, no space in her heart for wishes. The little girl who once imagined herself as someone special had long since disappeared, replaced by a tired girl who did as she was told. The village children often played near her home, their laughter ringing through the air as they ran barefoot through the fields. Zuri never joined them. She wasn't allowed. She would steal glances at them sometimes, feeling like an outsider, like she didn't belong. There was an invisible barrier between her and the world, one she had no power to break. That morning, as the sky slowly turned from deep blue to the soft shades of dawn, Rina's sharp voice cut through the silence. "Zuri, stop standing around and get to work. The stream won't bring the water itself." Zuri flinched and grabbed the large clay pot she used to collect water. It was heavier than her thin arms could handle, but she had learned not to complain. She nodded and stepped outside, her bare feet pressing into the cool earth. The path to the stream was long and winding, stretching through the forest where birds chirped in hidden corners. It was the only place where Zuri felt some sense of peace. As she walked, she thought of how different her life could have been. She had never dared to question why her stepmother treated her so poorly. Was it because she wasn't her real daughter? Was it because she reminded Rina of the man she had lost? The thoughts swirled in her mind, but she quickly pushed them aside. It didn't matter. What mattered was finishing her chores before Rina found another excuse to punish her. The moment she reached the stream, she knelt by the water's edge, dipping her fingers into the cool surface. It was quiet here, except for the occasional rustling of leaves or the sound of fish splashing beneath the surface. This was the only place where she could breathe, even if just for a moment. She leaned forward, watching her reflection in the water. A pair of dark eyes stared back at her, tired, but still holding something, a flicker of hope, no matter how small. Somewhere deep inside, she still wished for something more, something beyond this endless cycle of hardship. But she was just a girl with no power, no voice, and no control over her fate. A soft sigh escaped her lips as she reached for her clay pot, preparing to fill it. She had no idea that today would be different, that fate had already begun to move in ways she couldn't yet see. The kingdom of Adaran was vast and powerful, stretching beyond the eye could see, its lands filled with riches and prosperity. At its heart stood the Grand Palace, a structure of gold and ivory, where the royal family resided in luxury. Among them was Prince Akin, the future king, admired by many for his bravery and wisdom. Yet behind his charming smile and noble demeanor, Akin carried a burden that no one could see. As the only son of the king, Akin was raised with the weight of responsibility pressed firmly upon his shoulders. From an early age, he was trained in the art of warfare, diplomacy, and leadership. His tutors ensured that he was well versed in every aspect of ruling a kingdom, molding him into the perfect heir. But despite his noble birth and the privileges that came with it, Akin often found himself longing for something more, something deeper than duty, and obligation. Unlike his father, who ruled with an iron fist, Akin had a gentle heart. He believed that a king should not only be strong, but also compassionate. He had seen too many people bow before him out of fear rather than respect, and it troubled him. His mother, the queen, often reminded him that love was a weakness, that a ruler should never let emotions cloud his judgment. But Akin disagreed. He had always believed that true strength came from the heart, yet there was one struggle he could not ignore: the matter of his marriage. The royal advisors constantly reminded him that he needed to choose a bride, a woman of noble blood, who could strengthen the kingdom through political ties. But Akin didn't want a queen chosen by councilmen or dictated by tradition. He wanted love, something real, something that had nothing to do with his title. One morning, Akin decided to escape the confines of the palace and clear his thoughts. He gathered a few of his most trusted soldiers and set off on a hunting trip into the dense forests that bordered the kingdom. He had always found peace in the wilderness, away from the demands of court life. The scent of earth and fresh leaves, the distant calls of birds, it all made him feel more alive than the suffocating walls of the palace ever could. As they rode through the thick foliage, the sound of rushing water caught Akin's attention. He gestured for his men to slow down, his sharp eyes scanning the landscape. Not far ahead, a stream glistened under the morning sun, its clear waters flowing gently over smooth rocks. But it wasn't the stream that held his gaze. It was the girl beside it. She was kneeling by the water's edge, her delicate hands submerged in the cool stream as she filled a clay pot. Her simple dress clung to her slender form, and loose strands of hair framed her face. There was something different about her, an air of quiet grace, a purity that was rare in the world Akin knew. She moved with a gentleness that was almost mesmerizing, her presence so serene that for a moment Akin forgot where he was. "Who is she?" Akin murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. One of his soldiers, a man named Django, stepped forward. "She appears to be a common village girl, Your Highness, likely gathering water for her family." Akin didn't respond. He watched as the girl adjusted the pot on her head and rose to her feet. There was no one with her, no chattering maidens or curious children. She was alone. For the first time in his life, Akin felt something stir deep within him, an unfamiliar, yet undeniable pull toward this girl he had never met. He had seen many noble women, all dressed in the finest silks and adorned with gold, but none had ever caught his attention like this simple village girl. She was different, and he wanted to know why. As she turned to leave, Akin made a decision. He had to speak to her. He had to know her name. Zuri had never expected to see anyone by the stream, let alone a man dressed in such fine clothing. The moment her eyes met his, she felt her heart pound violently in her chest. His presence was unlike anything she had ever encountered before, commanding yet warm, noble yet approachable. She instinctively lowered her gaze, gripping the clay pot on her head as if it could shield her from his attention. Prince Akin remained seated on his horse, studying her with quiet curiosity. The golden sunlight filtering through the trees cast a soft glow on her dark skin, highlighting the delicate features of her face. There was an innocence in her wide, uncertain eyes, eyes that held stories of struggle, yet still shimmered with hope. Zuri knew better than to linger in the presence of someone so important. She had spent her entire life being reminded of her place, of how she was nothing more than a servant girl whose worth amounted to the chores she completed. What business did she have standing before a prince? Without a word, she adjusted the pot on her head and turned to leave. But Akin wasn't ready to let her go. "Wait." His voice was gentle, yet firm. Zuri hesitated. Every instinct told her to keep walking, to disappear into the safety of the trees, but there was something about his voice that made her pause. Slowly, she turned to face him again, her fingers tightening around the edges of her dress. Akin dismounted his horse, his movements graceful and deliberate. He had always been taught to command attention without demanding it, to carry himself with the confidence of a ruler. Yet, in that moment, he wasn't a prince speaking to a subject. He was simply a man curious about the girl who had unknowingly captured his interest. "What is your name?" he asked. Zuri's lips parted, but the words refused to come. No one of his status had ever spoken to her before. She felt a lump form in her throat as she struggled to find her voice. "Zuri," she finally whispered. Akin smiled, and for a brief moment it felt as if the entire forest had fallen silent. "That is a beautiful name." Zuri's cheeks warmed. She lowered her head again, unsure of how to respond. "You live nearby?" Akin continued, taking a step closer. She nodded. "In the village, with my stepmother." There was a sadness in her voice, a weight behind those few words that didn't go unnoticed by Akin. He glanced at the heavy pot of water she carried, and then at her worn-out clothes, realizing that life had not been kind to her. "Here," he said suddenly, reaching out his hand. "Let me help you." Zuri's eyes widened in shock. A prince, someone so powerful, so important, was offering to help her. She shook her head quickly, stepping back. "No, Your Highness. I cannot allow that." Akin chuckled softly. "Why not?" "Because—" She hesitated, struggling to explain. "It is not right." "Who decides what is right?" Akin questioned, tilting his head slightly. "If I choose to help, does that not make it right?" Zuri was at a loss for words. She had spent her life being told that royalty was untouchable, that people like her could never even dream of standing in their presence. And yet, here he was, challenging everything she had ever known. Akin took the pot from her head before she could protest, holding it as if it weighed nothing. Zuri gasped, watching in disbelief as the prince of the kingdom, someone who had never lifted a burden in his life, carried her load. They walked together toward the village, the prince and the servant girl, two worlds colliding in the most unexpected way. As they walked, Akin spoke freely, asking Zuri about her life, her dreams, and her struggles. At first, she answered with caution, afraid that he was simply curious for a moment and would forget about her soon after. But the more he spoke, the more she realized that he was different. He truly listened, genuinely cared. In return, Akin shared a piece of his world with her. He told her about the palace, about the expectations placed upon him, and how he longed for something real, something not dictated by royal duty. By the time they reached the outskirts of the village, something had shifted between them. Zuri no longer saw him as just a prince, and Akin no longer saw her as just a village girl. For the first time, they saw each other for who they truly were. Two souls searching for something more. Days turned into weeks, and each afternoon, just as the sun began to dip beyond the trees, Zuri found herself glancing toward the path leading to the stream. She knew she shouldn't hope for his presence, shouldn't allow herself to believe that a prince would continue to return just to see a simple village girl. But still, she waited. And every time she saw him approaching on horseback, her heart betrayed her with an excited flutter. Akin had made it a habit to visit her. At first, Zuri had thought it was coincidence, that perhaps his duties brought him near the stream, but soon it became clear. He came for her. He would dismount his horse, walk beside her as she fetched water, and talk to her as though they had been friends forever. It was a strange yet beautiful feeling, being seen by someone like him. But Zuri struggled to accept it. She reminded herself of who she was, an orphan, a girl who belonged to no one and had nothing. She was someone people looked past, someone whose only worth was measured by the tasks she completed. And yet, here was the prince, treating her as if she mattered. She couldn't understand why. "Why do you come here, Your Highness?" she asked one evening as they stood by the water. Her voice was quiet, hesitant. Akin had been skipping stones across the surface, but at her question, he stopped and turned to her. "Because I enjoy your company, Zuri," she frowned. "But why?" You are a prince. You have everything. Why would you spend your time with someone like me? Akin stepped closer, his dark eyes studying hers with quiet intensity. And what do you mean by someone like you? Zuri hesitated. I am a servant girl. And? Akin challenged gently. Does that make you unworthy of kindness, of friendship? She looked away. It makes me different from you. Akin exhaled, stepping even closer, until she could see the warmth in his gaze. Zuri, I was born into wealth, but that does not mean I am blind to what truly matters. You are different from anyone I have ever known. You speak with honesty. You do not try to impress me or pretend to be something you are not. When I am with you, I do not feel like a prince. I feel like myself. Zuri's heart clenched at his words. She wanted to believe them, but a lifetime of being overlooked and mistreated made it difficult to trust kindness when it came her way. But what if this is just sympathy? She whispered. What if you only feel sorry for me? Akin shook his head. I do not pity you, Zuri. I admire you. She swallowed hard, staring at him in disbelief. No one had ever said such words to her before. No one had ever seen her as anything beyond a servant. And yet, Akin did. That night, as she lay in her small room, she found herself thinking of him, of his voice, his words, the way he looked at her as if she were someone special. She knew she was slipping into something dangerous. She was allowing herself to hope. The next few days were filled with stolen moments, soft laughter, shared glances, and quiet conversations beneath the shade of the trees. Akin would bring her small gifts, nothing grand, just little things he thought she might like. A beaded bracelet, a beautifully carved wooden comb, a delicate flower he had picked from the royal gardens. Each time, Zuri would hesitate before accepting, but deep down, each gift felt like proof that she was not imagining what was growing between them. Still, she struggled with her emotions. What if this was just a passing whim for him? What if one day he grew tired of visiting the stream and never returned? She told herself not to dream, not to believe in impossible things. But each time Akin smiled at her, each time he reached for her hand just a little too long, her heart whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, she was wrong. The revelation came on a day like any other. Zuri had just returned from the stream, her thoughts still tangled with memories of Akin's latest visit, when she overheard hushed voices coming from inside the house. She paused by the doorway, her heart pounding as she caught the sharp edge of her stepmother Rina's voice. She can never know the truth, Rina hissed. If she ever finds out who she really is, everything I've built will be ruined. Zuri's breath caught in her throat. Who was Rina talking about? A sickening feeling settled in her stomach as she pressed her ear closer to the door. You stole her away from the palace, another voice whispered, one she recognized as the village elder's wife. The king was betrayed and his family destroyed, but the girl, she survived. If she learns she is the lost princess, she will have a claim to the throne. Zuri felt the world spin beneath her feet. A lost princess. Her heart pounded wildly as she stumbled away from the house, her mind racing. Could it be true? Could she, Zuri, the girl who had spent her life scrubbing floors and fetching water, truly be of royal blood? She had to know. That night, when the moon hung high in the sky, she searched through the old wooden chest in her stepmother's room. Her hands trembled as she sifted through faded cloth and trinkets until she found it. A delicate necklace with the royal crest, hidden beneath layers of old fabric. Her hands clenched around the pendant as tears burned her eyes. It was true. She had been lied to her entire life. The next day, she went to the only person she could trust, Akin. When she told him everything, he was silent for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then finally, he whispered, "You are of royal blood." Zuri nodded, her throat tight. But I don't feel like a princess, Akin. I don't know how to be one. Akin reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. You don't have to change who you are, Zuri. But this changes everything. Zuri looked into his eyes and saw something there, something deeper than shock. Fear. What are you thinking? She asked quietly. Akin exhaled, his grip on her hand tightening. If you are a lost princess, then there will be people who want to control you. There will be expectations, politics. This is bigger than just us, Zuri. She swallowed hard, understanding his unspoken words. Their love had already been complicated. He, a prince, and she, a servant. But now, with her true identity revealed, it wasn't just a love story anymore. It was a political affair. Zuri didn't care about thrones or royal bloodlines. She had never wanted power, but she wanted Akin. And now, she feared she might lose him. I don't want to be a princess, she whispered. I just want to be me. Akin cupped her face gently, his dark eyes filled with emotions she couldn't quite name. Then be you. I don't care about your title, Zuri. I love you. Her breath hitched at his words, but even as his confession sent warmth flooding through her chest, a deep unease settled in her bones. Because she knew the world would not let them love so easily. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. The revelation of Zuri's identity spread quickly, and soon the palace sent messengers requesting her presence. Akin stood by her side as she walked through the grand halls of the royal court for the first time, her heart pounding. The elders, once skeptical, studied her closely. Whispers filled the air, some doubtful, others hopeful. Could the lost princess truly have returned? But Zuri was no longer just a scared servant girl. She held her head high, remembering Akin's words. Be you. When she spoke, her voice was steady. I never sought power or a crown, but I will not turn away from my past. I am my father's daughter, and I will honor his name. Akin stood beside her, unwavering, and I will stand with her. Despite initial resistance, the people embraced Zuri. The kingdom had suffered under years of corruption, and her return became a symbol of hope. With Akin's guidance, she learned the ways of leadership, not as a queen who ruled with an iron fist, but as a leader who understood the struggles of her people. Yet, through it all, she never lost herself. She continued visiting the village, ensuring no one suffered as she once had. The stream where she and Akin first met remained their secret place, a reminder of the love that had blossomed before fate intervened. Their wedding was a grand celebration, but for Zuri, the most meaningful part was Akin's promise. I loved you before I knew you were a princess, he whispered as they stood together beneath the golden glow of lanterns. And I will love you no matter what. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were tears of joy. For the first time, Zuri wasn't just surviving, she was truly living. And as she looked around at the kingdom she had once feared, she realized that fate had never been her enemy. It had simply been leading her home. The story of Zuri and Akin is more than just a tale of love. It is a testament to the power of resilience, self-discovery, and destiny. Zuri, who once believed she was nothing more than an unfortunate girl, burdened with endless struggles, found strength within herself. She proved that one's beginnings do not define their worth, and no amount of hardship can take away a person's true identity. Her journey teaches us that no matter how difficult life seems, there is always hope for change. Zuri's kindness and perseverance led her to a future she never could have imagined. She never allowed her painful past to make her bitter, and despite being treated unfairly, she remained compassionate. This is a lesson that even in the darkest moments, we should hold on to our goodness, because life has a way of rewarding those who remain true to themselves. Akin's role in the story reminds us that love is not about status or wealth. It is about seeing and valuing a person for who they truly are. He could have chosen to ignore Zuri, but instead, he followed his heart. His love for her was not based on appearances or royal expectations, but on the genuine connection they shared. His actions show that true love is built on mutual respect, understanding, and the willingness to stand by each other, even in uncertainty. Another important lesson from this story is about destiny. Zuri thought she was just an ordinary girl with no power over her future, yet fate had bigger plans for her. Many times, we feel lost, believing that life is unfair, but often we are being prepared for something greater. Challenges and struggles shape us, and just like Zuri, we must embrace them rather than fear them. The story also touches on justice and redemption. Zuri's stepmother tried to keep her from knowing her true identity, but in the end, truth always prevails. Those who act with cruelty may seem powerful for a time, but eventually, their actions catch up with them. The world has a way of correcting injustices, even if it takes time. In the end, Zuri not only found love, but also discovered her purpose. She did not allow power to change her. Instead, she used it to make the kingdom a better place. She became a queen who understood the struggles of the people because she had once lived through them herself. Her humility, strength, and kindness made her a leader unlike any other. This story is a reminder that no matter where we come from, we all have the power to shape our own destiny. It encourages us to stay strong in the face of challenges, to believe in love that is pure and honest, and to always remain true to who we are. Because in the end, life has a way of bringing us exactly where we are meant to be.